I like noodles. Cool noodles. Coach Massi here from M2 Speed, Strength, and Performance with another episode of Move Your Feet. In this episode, we're covering basics of ground reaction forces, episode number 3. We've been doing this entire series on the basic of ground reaction forces, and we're actually filming it one piece at a time because we're trying to handle the email inquiries and questions that we have coming in, which we really appreciate. So we're doing it one piece at a time. Before we even kick this off, let's just say we're hyped. We're going to be out and we're going to run through all of this soup to nuts the best we can in Orlando, Florida at the PP Perform Better Summit that they're going to have in Orlando June 2nd through the 4th. So we hope you guys will be in attendance. We would really appreciate that. But for today, we're going to actually look at some of the inquiries we had. And a lot of the inquiries were like, what does ground reaction forces really look like? And what's some low-tech ways I can explain it to my clients and athletes? And that was a really good question because the inquiry about how do we kind of demonstrate it in low-tech ways to our clients seems like something that's near and dear to our hearts because we want everybody to be equipped to basically explain this to their clientele and their populations without needing fancy technology, force plates, and just basically using some good old-fashioned tools that you might have around your shops today. So one of the thoughts we had was a whiteboard. So everybody's pretty much got whiteboards, whether you have big ones or you have small ones. You can put this together on a whiteboard. There are some illustrations online that you can just Google them, but we feel like this is a pretty good illustration. So I'm going to step out of the way a little bit, and I'm actually going to lean this board towards you as we take a look at this. This way there's no glare. So really, I'm trying to break down the ground reaction forces in what we call those three main elements of ground reaction forces. First is the point of application down to the ground. That's using your own human energy to create force and to put that force into the ground at what's called the point of application. Then from there, you immediately get back, based on Newtonian rules, you get that ground reaction force back from the ground on what's called your line of action. And then the magnitude or the enormity of that ground reaction force is what is called the magnitude. So basically off those three elements, we could play around with the idea of what ground reaction forces look like. Once again, boom, point of application, ground reaction force comes back on the line of action, and then you have the magnitude of the ground reaction force. And just think about that for a minute before we get into the other considerations. Some of the questions we had, and which were excellent inquiries, were, does the ground reaction force line of action come back completely vertical? What does that depend on? And I had theorized on some of that about it pertaining to particular joint angles, maybe some of the elasticity found in connective tissues. So I got on the horn with my exercise physiology, kinesiology mentor, Dr. Tony Catarizano down at Furman University, and we spoke for a bit. And you know, does it come back completely vertical? Well, you know, this is what we have to play with and figure out. Are we getting that line of action completely back directly underneath? If so, how do we immediately capitalize on that ground reaction force to get it to lend to our next movement? And we're going to do a little demo on that you guys can show to your populations also. But before we get to that, some of what we have to consider with the ground reaction force is what we had already said. What is that return vector? Where does that exist? Is it completely vertical? Or if I have more of an angular application, perhaps, as I'm, say, sprinting, maybe if the angle is different, is the ground reaction force coming back at a particular angle that can lend to the furthering of that movement for what we want the desired result to be? Well, we have to play with that a little bit, theorize on it a little bit. That's where that joint angle comes in. That's where the consideration of the elasticity and the connective tissues come in. But also what we're really taking a look at in this entire series, and we're going to talk about a lot in Orlando, is decay, dissipation, and the distribution of that force, and then what the surface composition is. So, for example, decay. One of my questions to Dr. Catarizano is, how long is that ground reaction force available to us? Is it like a millisecond? What is it? Is it there? Does it wait for us to react? Obviously not, because you're going to have a degree of decay or dissipation, right? It'll dissipate over whatever time is in X. And I think in your programming you need to be aware of that's where you get into like ground contact time and how to capitalize on it. How long does it last? How long do you want to be there? How quickly do you want to get away from it? And then also, this is where we start looking at the distribution of those ground reaction forces and the distribution of force in general, okay? And a lot of that may have to do with the surface composition. So if the surface composition is more like a foam-backed turf, what then would be the affect on the dissipation and distribution of those ground reaction forces? So, you know, we always have this question. We seem to train everybody on the turf to mitigate ground reaction forces. We teach landings, etc. But we have to be mindful that if they play their sport on a court, we have to consider that. If they play it on a harder floor or a harder surface, we have to consider that when taking them through protocols, you know, solely on the turf. We really have to be very, very aware of that. So what I'm going to ask Matt to do is I'm going to ask him to zoom out now. This way he can kind of give us a little bit more space on the camera and make an adjustment on the camera so we can see a little more widely. And once he gets back there, we're going to call him in. So he'll make his adjustment. In the meantime, this is where we need to start talking about the concepts of creating, borrowing, and lending. So Matt's going to come on in. Thanks for serving dual purpose here. So simple, creating. Well, that's how we create our force. We create the force from our body. Then we want to borrow the ground reaction forces. Then we want to lend it to the very next movement, whatever that might be. So if Matt is just going to turn, and if he lifts a foot and he goes down into the ground, he created force, which gave him back ground reaction force. And the most pressing question is, how do you build your protocols and progressions to learn how to properly capitalize and utilize that force in a timely fashion to serve the very next movement you are looking to perform, or the very next element you're looking to achieve? So once again, we have these simple conversations with clients to kind of give them an idea why we do things, why we have elements, protocols, and progression that may be shorter than other protocols, and what we're looking to achieve when it comes to this. Whether it's velocity-based training and lifting, or it's speed and agility training, ground reaction forces are always present. So, look, we came up with a simple demo many years ago, and it looks something like this. So these are pool noodles. You know what pool noodles are. They're really inexpensive and they're good to keep around. And in episodes coming up, you'll also see how we use them to kind of demonstrate pressure. But if this is Matt's point of application, so Matt lifts it up, boom, point of application. Okay, there's his point of application, right? So that's his line there. Now this is where these return vectors start to come in. Now, one of the questions was, does the ground reaction force come back in a complete vertical fashion? Well, I would imagine if you take that part of your foot, let's say the ball of the foot, and you go completely vertical, what's going to happen is you're going to get your point of application, then you're going to get this as your line of action, okay? Then, depending upon the force you put into the ground would be the magnitude, the enormity of that force, okay, that ground reaction force that you get back. So let's say Matt more so did something like at more of an angle, Matt. Maybe you can demo that. So let's say he gets at more of an angle, his heel stays up. Okay, so I'm going to pick that as that angle here. So his point of application is going to be more like a diagonal now, right? So boom, like that. So let's imagine, okay, now his line of action will be coming like this. So he's going to want to know what he has to do to capitalize on that line of action. These are the ground reaction forces he got back, the magnitude of the ground reaction force, and boom, what he's going to do with that force in a timely fashion to, if he was sprinting, continue that way and get the most out of the ground reaction forces that were given back to him for free. Well, he had to create them. So look, this is simple stuff. Sometimes we tell people, you know, okay, we put them behind each other if they hide. Okay, so blue is point of application. Boom. Orange, line of action. Now what are you going to do next? Just simple demos. I mean, look, it's not rocket science. It is what it is. But it also helps to have our people understand what it is to create, borrow, and lend. So, Matt, do it completely flat-footed. And listen, don't do this for long periods of time. Not great on the joints. And in the next episode, we'll actually talk about how we train these protocols and we make sure we're mitigating the forces not to cause any type of injury, pain, etc. So, a flat-footed hop. So that flat-footed hop, and hopping is a great way to demonstrate this. Let's do a few reps of that. Flat-footed, 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 flat-footed. Okay, good. So that flat-footed hop might be a really good example of the point of application being super vertical and you getting back a super vertical force, which you're probably going to feel that ground reaction force through your ankle right up to your knee, and if you're kind of locked out, into your hip. Now, if you do more of like a ball of a foot hop, you'll find that you float around a little bit. Nobody can really stay in the same place. The reason being, and maybe to answer a previous question, is because you have that heel up and there's a little bit more angular point of application there, you're kind of projecting yourself forward by virtue of the ground reaction forces themselves. So listen, super simple stuff, and you could get back there again, Matt. We have to create, borrow, and lend. We have to remember that. It's going to be a recurring thought, a recurring theme throughout this series. So you can tell your people, create the force, borrow the ground reaction force coming back, and then lend it. Very simple. Use the pool noodles. Show them what the point of application looks like, what the line of action looks like. Rattle it and make it look like there's some magnitude to it, and they'll begin to understand that they have to utilize that for the very next movement. And then lastly, the hopping protocol. Either just use a very flat-footed, stiff leg hop, which kind of lets them understand point of application, line of action, the magnitude, and then a little bit with the heel lifted up so you have a little bit more of a horizontal aspect hop, where you'll notice that by virtue of the ground reaction force, you can't really stay in the same place. You'll start getting propelled forward a little bit. They're just really good illustrations. Remember, soup to nuts on this at the Perform Better Summit. That's going to be in Orlando, Florida, June 2nd through the 4th, I believe it is. And we love having you out. Keep the emails coming. We appreciate you. We appreciate your time. Remember, greatness is forged, not fabricated. That's your day.